We are back for another news video, and we move to expectations for AEW All In, as the first talent has been announced for All In, and we'll get to that in a minute. I just want to get to some WWE news, as apparently WWE is set to retaliate over AEW Collision. It is unclear what WWE will do because their pay-per-views are 90% of the time on Saturdays. So I don't know if it would make sense to, move around a show, do occasional specials or whatever the case is, because I honestly think having their premium live events on Saturdays have worked wonders for WWE, and having pay-per-views on Saturdays would do better than having an actual branded event, because you're not going to lose those people who are going to watch their pay-per-view in favor of watching Collision unless AEW can prove that Collision is not going to just be another Rampage. And it would be a mistake for WWE to go the route of, choosing to have their pay-per-views on a different day because AEW is having their shows on a different day, having a new show, because having their pay-per-views on the day that they've been having their pay-per-views has benefited them more than it's hampered them, because I think more people watch their pay-per-views on a Saturday than they would on a Sunday. But again, that's just my opinion. If what retaliation WWE has planned is just WWE basically putting together better pay-per-views on a more regular basis and putting everything they can into every pay-per-view, well, God willing, that's what they do, because that's what they should do with every pay-per-view. Otherwise, what the heck's the point of having a pay-per-view? You know what I mean? Otherwise, what the heck's the point of having a pay-per-view if you're not going to put everything you can into that pay-per-view? You know what I mean? But I don't really know the point of retaliation. I don't know the point of that outside of it's WWE's pay-per-view day and they don't want to lose their pay-per-view day to AEW because of AEW having a new show. So I think WWE should not overreact and just keep things how they are. And as far as having NXT shows on that show, on that night, and switching back with WWE, the main pay-per-views, I think it's a mistake. I think keeping their pay-per-views on the Saturdays like they have been has benefited them, and it would be a mistake to move them. Just because AEW is having what is an unproven commodity on a new day. But we'll see what happens. Also, we got expectations of what happened with why Bron Breakker was not brought up to the main roster with the draft. And the main reason why Bron Breakker was not brought up to the main roster with the draft is because WWE has loved his heel work on NXT and wants him to keep working at being a heel on NXT and perfecting the new gimmick on NXT before they bring him up to the main roster. They don't want to bring him up to the main roster this early because he just started working as a heel, and they want to keep giving him the opportunity to work as a heel, where there is a possibility and tentative plans that Bron Breakker would be brought up to the main roster after SummerSlam, as opposed to now, which would give him a majority of the year to work at being a heel. This way, when he comes up to the main roster, he could be a top heel in the company, as opposed to still learning how to be one. And speaking of somebody who could have been a top heel, or was a top heel at one point, Brian Kendrick. Brian Kendrick was somebody that has a checkered past with WWE because of experiences and opinions that may not be agreed upon with everybody else, but Bad Bunny was trained by or helped in ring by Brian Kendrick. And I think Brian Kendrick deserves some props for that as a trainer, working with Bad Bunny to help him prepare for the match at Backlash against Damian Priest. Speaking of preparation, AEW has every intention, or should have every intention, to be preparing for their biggest event ever for a company outside of WWE, and that is because on August 27th, AEW will be at Wembley Stadium in front of over 60,000 fans in what will be a stupendous event. But AEW has all the expectations on them to make the event one that nobody will soon forget. And with the fact that the first talent has now been announced for the event, it is pretty clear that it will be, in my opinion, it's pretty clear that it will be an event that we won't soon forget. Because Will Osprey, of all people, is the first man announced for AEW All In at Wembley. And even though Will Osprey is a New Japan star and is not a star of AEW, Wembley Stadium is one of if not the arena with it's the Madison Square Garden of the UK, and the one arena where if you want to say, if you're from that area and you say you've performed at Wembley, that carries weight. That carries weight because of the legacy, the lineage, and the history that is attached to Wembley Stadium for those in the United Kingdom. It is the venue, Wembley Stadium is, and one venue that everybody in that area dreams to participate and have a match in. It is unclear who Osprey will fight, but according to Dave Meltzer, I believe it was Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer, Will Osprey is the first member of the roster, or of any roster for that matter, to be signed on to compete at All In August. With that being said, it is unclear if the BCC versus the Elite will be settled by then, as I know there's a ton of people that wants to see Osprey versus Omega at All In England. But my one question is, if you want to see that, what happens if you don't? Not what happens if you don't see it. What happens if you don't see it? What if Osprey's versing somebody else? Would you be disappointed, or would you be okay with it because at least Osprey's on the card? And speaking of Kenny Omega just got stabbed in the back by his longtime friend Don Callis. I'm not gonna say I saw it coming, but I'm not gonna say that I didn't. I saw it coming when at a certain point. But before that point, I'm like, yeah. Like, I understand why they went the route of ending the match the way they did. It's because they weren't sure if they would be able to continue, especially Kenny with how he landed on the cage when the cage wall broke. But it was a perfectly executed thing, and I think a lot of people are extensively frustrated with Don Callis now and pissed off, and Callis has a shit ton of heat, and I hope AEW does wonders with it as far as using that heat, because I think this is something that they've been building to for a while as far as Callis turning on Kenny Omega, because it's something that has been building in the background and simmering in the background for months at this point, with Don Callis' actions with Hangman Page and the Young Bucks as well. Either way, though, that is it for me from the news. Let me know down in the comment section below your thoughts on anything and everything that I spoke about in these videos, and I will see you in the next